A Marine sergeant cornered a female soldier in the barracks hallway, his voice dripping with venom as he snarled. 2 words that would change his life forever. Die now. But he had no idea who he was threatening. What happened next would expose a secret that had been buried for 25 years, and reveal a truth so shocking that it would shake the entire military base to its core. Hey, real quick, comment your city below. I'm always amazed by how many places these stories reach. And if you're into true stories with real emotion, make sure you're subscribed. The fluorescent lights in the barracks hallway flickered as Sergeant Marcus Reeves stepped closer to the woman in front of him. His 6'3" frame towered over her, casting a shadow that swallowed her whole. His face was twisted with contempt, his breath hot with alcohol and rage. Die now, he hissed, his fist clenched at his side. The woman didn't flinch. She stood perfectly still, her gray eyes calm and focused, her posture relaxed but ready. Her name was Lieutenant Sarah Chun, and she had transferred to Camp Pendleton just 3 weeks ago. To everyone on base, she was just another junior officer, quiet and unremarkable, trying to find her place in a world dominated by men who questioned her every move. But Sarah Chun was not who they thought she was. Marcus had been drinking at the NCO club when he overheard 2 privates talking about the new lieutenant. They said she had filed a complaint about training protocols, suggesting that some of the combat drills were outdated and dangerous. Marcus took it personally. He had designed those drills himself, and the idea that some female officer who had probably never seen real combat would dare question his methods made his blood boil. He found her walking back to her quarters alone, and he decided to teach her a lesson about respect. You think you can come here and tell us how to do our jobs? Marcus growled, stepping even closer. You think you're special because you have a degree and a commission? You're nothing. You're weak. You don't belong here. Sarah's expression didn't change. She had heard these words before, in different voices, in different places. She had spent her entire career hearing them. But she had learned long ago that the best response was silence. Let them talk. Let them reveal who they really are. I'm talking to you, Marcus snapped, his voice rising. When a superior addresses you, you answer. You're not my superior, Sarah said quietly. Her voice was steady, almost gentle. You're a sergeant. I'm a lieutenant. And you're drunk. Marcus's face turned red. His hand shot out and grabbed her shoulder, his fingers digging into her flesh. You don't get to disrespect me. You don't get to walk around here like you own the place. Maybe you need a reminder of what happens to people who don't know their place. That's when he said it again, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. Die now. And that's when everything changed. Sarah's hand moved so fast that Marcus didn't even see it. One moment he was gripping her shoulder. The next he was face down on the floor with his arm twisted behind his back in a joint lock that sent white-hot pain shooting through his entire body. He tried to move, tried to resist, but the pressure increased instantly, and he felt something in his shoulder begin to give way. Don't move, Sarah said softly. There was no anger in her voice, no emotion at all. Just a simple statement of fact. If you move, your shoulder will dislocate. If you try to fight, you'll tear 3 ligaments. Stay still. Marcus couldn't breathe. The pain was overwhelming, but it wasn't just the physical agony that paralyzed him. It was the speed, the precision, the absolute control in her movements. This wasn't the reaction of a junior officer who had never seen combat. This was the work of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. 2 MPs rounded the corner, their hands moving to their weapons until they saw Sarah's uniform and rank. Lieutenant? One of them called out. What's going on here? Sergeant Reeves threatened my life and assaulted me, Sarah said calmly. I defended myself. He's intoxicated and needs to be taken into custody. The MPs moved quickly, pulling Marcus to his feet and cuffing his hands behind his back. He was still in shock, still trying to process what had just happened. As they led him away, he turned back to look at Sarah one more time. She was standing exactly where she had been, her expression unchanged, her breathing steady. Who the hell was she? The next morning, Colonel James Patterson sat in his office reviewing the incident report with growing disbelief. He had been commanding officer at Camp Pendleton for 3 years, and he thought he had seen everything. But this was different. "Let me get this straight," he said, looking up at his executive officer. "Sergeant Reeves, one of our most experienced combat instructors, threatened Lieutenant Chun, and she subdued him in approximately 2 seconds using a technique that our own hand-to-hand combat specialists say they've never seen before?" "That's correct, sir," Major Davis replied. "Reeves is claiming she broke his arm, but the medical report shows only soft tissue damage and a minor sprain. The restraint was perfect. No excessive force, no permanent injury, just complete control." Colonel Patterson leaned back in his chair. "What do we know about Lieutenant Chun?" "Very little, sir. Her file is surprisingly thin. She transferred here from a logistics position at a Joint Operations Center in Virginia. Her evaluations are all satisfactory, but unremarkable. No combat deployments on record. No special training certifications. Nothing that would explain what happened last night." The colonel frowned. Something didn't add up. "Get her in here. I want to talk to her myself." When Sarah entered the colonel's office 20 minutes later, she moved with a quiet confidence that immediately caught his attention. She saluted crisply and stood at attention, waiting to be addressed. "At ease, Lieutenant," Colonel Patterson said, gesturing to a chair. "Sit down. We need to talk." Sarah sat, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. The colonel studied her for a long moment. She was in her mid-40s, he estimated, with short dark hair showing hints of gray at the temples. Her face was calm, almost serene, but her eyes held something he couldn't quite identify. Depth, experience, pain. "I've read the incident report," the colonel said. "I've also spoken with the MPs and reviewed the security footage. What you did last night was impressive. More than impressive. It was expert-level defensive tactics. So I have to ask, where did you learn to do that?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I've had training, sir." "What kind of training?" "The kind that prepares you for dangerous situations." Colonel Patterson felt his patience beginning to fray. "Lieutenant, I'm trying to help you here. Sergeant Reeves has filed a counter-complaint claiming you used excessive force. His friends are rallying around him, and there's talk of questioning your fitness for command. If you want to defend yourself, I need to know who you really are." Sarah was silent for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small black case. She opened it and placed it on the colonel's desk. Inside was a trident pin, the golden symbol of the Navy SEALs. Colonel Patterson stared at it, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "That's not possible," he said slowly. Women weren't allowed in SEAL training until 2016, and even then, the integration was limited. I'm telling you that my file is thin because most of my career is classified," Sarah interrupted quietly. "I'm telling you that the person you see in front of you is not the person I used to be. And I'm telling you that for the last 25 years, I've kept a secret that could have destroyed my career and my life." The room fell silent. Colonel Patterson picked up the trident, turning it over in his hands. It was real, old, worn. The gold had been dulled by years of wear. "Explain," he said, and Sarah did. She told him about growing up as Samuel Chun, a boy who never felt right in his own body, who knew from his earliest memories that something fundamental was wrong. She told him about joining the Navy at 18, desperate to prove himself, to become the man everyone expected him to be. She told him about making it through Bud-S training, about earning the trident, about spending 15 years on SEAL, team operations that she still couldn't discuss in detail. She told him about the missions in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and places that didn't officially exist. She told him about the men she had saved and the enemies she had eliminated. She told him about becoming one of the most effective operators in her unit, respected by her teammates. trusted with the most dangerous assignments, and she told him about the secret she carried every single day, the truth she could never speak, the knowledge that if anyone discovered who she really was, everything would be taken away. I lived in fear for 15 years, Sarah said, her voice steady but heavy with emotion. Fear that someone would notice. Fear that my body would betray me. Fear that I would lose the only family I had ever known. The teens were everything to me. They gave me purpose, identity, brotherhood. But I was living a lie. When did you transition? Colonel Patterson asked softly. 10 years ago. I had reached my 20-year mark and I couldn't do it anymore. The dysphoria was destroying me from the inside. I was having panic attacks before missions. I was making mistakes. I knew that if I didn't finally become who I really was, I was going to die. So I separated from the teens quietly, moved across the country, and started the medical transition process under a different name. Sarah's hands tightened in her lap. For 5 years, I lived as a civilian. I tried to build a normal life, but I missed the service. I missed having a mission. So I applied to rejoin the military through a conventional commission program, using my new legal identity. My SEAL career is buried so deep in classified files that no one made the connection. Sarah Chun has no connection to Samuel Chun. They're two different people in two different databases. The colonel set the trident down carefully. Why are you telling me this now? You could have just let me handle the Reeves situation without revealing any of this. Because Sergeant Reeves threatened to kill me, Sarah said simply. Because his friends are already spreading rumors that I'm weak, that I'm a liability, that I don't belong here. And because I'm tired of hiding who I am. I'm tired of pretending that I don't have the skills and experience that I earned with blood and sacrifice. If my career ends because of this, then it ends. But I won't be silent anymore. Colonel Patterson stood and walked to his window, looking out over the base. He thought about his own daughter, about the world she was growing up in, about the changes he had seen in his 30 years of service. He thought about courage and what it really meant. Finally, he turned back to Sarah. Your secret is safe with me, he said. And not just because it's the right thing to do, but because you're exactly the kind of officer this base needs. You've shown more courage in this conversation than most people show in their entire lives. And what you did last night wasn't just self-defense. It was a masterclass in controlled force and professional restraint. He picked up the trident and handed it back to her. But I need to ask, can you teach what you know? Sarah looked up at him, surprised. Sir, our hand-to-hand combat program is outdated. You said so yourself in your report. Sergeant Reeves took it as an insult, but you were right. We're teaching techniques that don't reflect real-world combat situations. If you're willing, I want you to redesign the program. I want you to train our instructors. And I want you to show everyone on this base what real expertise looks like. For the first time since entering the office, Sarah's composure cracked. Her eyes glistened with moisture. You're giving me a command position? After what I just told you. I'm giving you the position you've earned, Colonel Patterson corrected. What you were before doesn't matter to me. Who you are now does. And right now, you're the most qualified person on this base for the job. The changes started immediately. Colonel Patterson dismissed the charges against Sarah and instead brought Sergeant Reeves up on formal disciplinary action for assault and threatening an officer. The investigation revealed that Reeves had a pattern of aggressive behavior toward female service members, incidents that had been overlooked or dismissed because of his combat record and his connections. Meanwhile, Sarah began working with the base's training division to overhaul the combat instruction program. She brought techniques from her SEAL training, adapted and modified them for conventional military use, and created a curriculum that emphasized real-world scenarios and adaptive thinking. The first training session was tense. 20 combat instructors, most of them men, most of them skeptical, sat in the training room watching this quiet female lieutenant with obvious doubt. Sarah stood in front of them in her duty uniform, calm and professional. "My name is Lieutenant Sarah Chun," she said, "and I'm going to teach you things that might save your life or the lives of the people you train. Some of you don't think I'm qualified to be here. That's fine. Watch and learn. Then decide." She called for a volunteer. A staff sergeant in the front row stood up, a man who outweighed her by at least 80 pounds. Sarah gestured him to the center of the room. "Attack me," she said simply. The staff sergeant hesitated. "Ma'am, I don't want to hurt you." "You won't," Sarah replied. There was no arrogance in her voice, just quiet certainty. "Attack me like you would attack an enemy combatant. Full force. No holding back." The staff sergeant shrugged and moved forward, throwing a heavy punch aimed at Sarah's head. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. Sarah deflected the punch, stepped inside his guard, and used his own momentum to take him to the ground. Before he could react, she had him in a submission hold that left him completely immobilized. "This is position Alpha," Sarah said calmly, addressing the room while still holding the staff sergeant. "From here, I have 12 different options for escalation or de-escalation, depending on the threat level. Notice that I'm not using my strength against his. I'm using leverage, positioning, and timing. This works regardless of size or gender. That's the point." She released him and helped him to his feet. The staff sergeant was breathing hard, his face flushed with embarrassment and amazement. Over the next 3 months, Sarah transformed the training program. Word spread quickly through the base about the quiet lieutenant who could take down Marines twice her size, who taught with patience and precision, who never bragged but simply demonstrated excellence. But not everyone was happy about the changes. Sergeant Reeves had been demoted and reassigned. But his friends remained, and they resented Sarah's rising influence. They spread rumors, made crude jokes, and did everything they could to undermine her credibility. Some of it was misogyny, some of it was wounded pride, and some of it was genuine confusion about how someone with no official combat record could possess such obvious expertise. The tension came to a head during a base-wide training exercise. Sarah had designed a new close-quarters combat scenario that required teams to work together to neutralize a threat in a confined space. One of the participating units was led by Gunnery Sergeant Mike Torres, one of Reeves' closest friends. Torres deliberately sabotaged the exercise. He ignored Sarah's instructions, put his team in dangerous positions. And when the scenario inevitably failed, he blamed her design in front of the entire observation group. "This is what happens when you let unqualified people run training," Torres announced loudly. "Lieutenant Chun might have impressed some people with her little demonstrations, but she doesn't understand real combat. She's never been deployed. She's never been in a firefight. She's just plain soldier." The observation area fell silent. Everyone turned to look at Sarah. She stood quietly, her expression unreadable, letting Torres finish his rant. When he was done, she walked to the center of the room. "You're right about one thing, Gunnery Sergeant," she said clearly. "I've never been deployed under the name Sarah Chun, but Samuel Chun was deployed 14 times to combat zones across 3 continents. Samuel Chun earned a Silver Star in Ramadi for holding a position for 6 hours while wounded, allowing his team to evacuate civilians under fire. Samuel Chun spent 15 years as a Navy SEAL before transitioning 10 years ago and rejoining the military as the person I always should have been." The room erupted. Some people gasped. Others started talking all at once. Torres stood frozen, his mouth open in shock. Colonel Patterson, who had been watching from the back of the room, stepped forward. "What Lieutenant Chun has just revealed is true and verified. I've seen her classified file. I've confirmed her service record. And I've made the decision to keep her in her current position because she is the most qualified instructor on this base, regardless of her gender identity or her past." He turned to face the assembled group. "Some of you will have a problem with this. Some of you will struggle with what you just learned. That's human. But let me be absolutely clear. Lieutenant Chun has served this country with honor and distinction. She has skills that most of us will never possess. And she deserves your respect. If any of you cannot give her that respect, you can request a transfer. Otherwise, you will treat her like any other officer. Are we clear? A chorus of yes, sir, echoed through the room, but Sarah knew that this was only the beginning. The secret she had guarded for so long was now public knowledge, at least on this base. There would be consequences. There would be questions. There would be judgment. And she was right. Over the next few weeks, the reactions varied wildly. Some service members sought her out to express their support. Others avoided her entirely. A few made it clear they thought she was a disgrace to the uniform. The base chaplain offered counseling. The legal office started asking questions about her enlistment papers and whether she had committed fraud. Sarah weathered it all with the same quiet dignity she had shown throughout her career. She continued teaching. She continued training. She continued being excellent at her job. But at night, alone in her quarters, the weight of exposure crushed her. She had spent 25 years hiding, protecting herself, maintaining the lie that kept her safe. Now that protection was gone. She was vulnerable in ways she had never been before, even in combat. One evening, she received a message requesting her presence at the base commander's office. She walked across the compound under the setting sun, wondering if this was finally the end. If this was when they would tell her that her service was no longer wanted, that the complications she created weren't worth the benefits she provided. But when she entered Colonel Patterson's office, she found 3 other people waiting. One was a Navy captain she didn't recognize. One was a civilian in a suit who carried himself like military intelligence. And one was a woman in her 60s, wearing a commander's uniform, her chest heavy with decorations. "Lieutenant Chun," Colonel Patterson said, "these people have come from Washington to speak with you. I'm going to leave you alone with them." Sarah's heart pounded as the colonel left and closed the door. The woman in the commander's uniform stood and extended her hand. "My name is Commander Rebecca Walsh," she said. "I work in Naval Special Warfare Command. We need to talk about your future." For the next hour, they asked Sarah questions about her SEAL career, her transition, her current skills, and training philosophy. They were thorough, professional, and surprisingly respectful. Finally, Commander Walsh leaned back in her chair. "You've created a problem for us, Lieutenant," she said. "But you've also created an opportunity. The military is changing. We're finally recognizing that talent comes in all forms, and that we've been wasting potential by maintaining outdated restrictions and prejudices. Your story, difficult as it is, represents something important." She pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "We want to offer you a position developing training protocols for Special Operations Command. It would mean a promotion, a move to Virginia, and a very public role. You would be the face of inclusion efforts in special warfare communities. You would work with SEAL teams, Army Special Forces, Marine Raiders, all of them. You would help shape the future of special operations training." Sarah stared at the folder, not touching it. "Why would you trust me with that? Half the people on this base think I'm a fraud. The other half don't know what to think. I lied about who I was for 15 years. You survived," Commander Walsh corrected gently. "You did what you had to do to serve your country in a time when being your authentic self would have ended your career. That's not fraud. That's sacrifice. And now you have a chance to make sure that no one else has to make that same sacrifice." The civilian spoke for the first time. "We've already started vetting your story with the media. In 3 days, a major news outlet is going to break the story about the first Navy SEAL to transition and continue serving. It's going to be national news, probably international. You can either hide from it, or you can control the narrative. This position gives you the platform to control it." Sarah felt dizzy. 3 days. In 3 days, her life would change again, irrevocably. Everyone would know. Her family, her old teammates, everyone from her past. The secret she had protected for a quarter of a century will be exposed to the world. I need time to think, she said. You have 24 hours, the captain said. After that, the story breaks with or without your cooperation. We prefer to have you on board, but we understand if you choose differently. They left her alone in the office. Sarah sat in the silence, her mind racing. She thought about Samuel, the frightened boy who had joined the Navy to prove himself. She thought about the SEAL who had earned his trident through blood and pain and endless determination. She thought about the woman she had become, quietly rebuilding her life in the shadows. And she thought about Sergeant Reeves, drunk and angry. Hissing those two words that had started this entire chain of events. Die now. But she hadn't died. She had survived. And maybe that was the point. Maybe survival wasn't just about making it through combat or training or transition. Maybe survival meant finally stepping into the light and refusing to hide anymore. The next morning, Sarah walked into Colonel Patterson's office and told him her decision. I'll take the position, she said. And I'll talk to the media. But I want to do it my way. I want to tell my story honestly, including the painful parts. I want to talk about the cost of hiding and the courage it takes to finally be yourself. And I want to make it clear that I'm not a hero because I'm transgender. I'm a hero because I serve my country with honor, just like thousands of other service members who happen to be different in ways that shouldn't matter, but somehow still do. Colonel Patterson smiled. That sounds exactly right. 3 days later, the story broke. News outlets around the world carried headlines of the Navy SEAL who had transitioned and continued serving. Sarah gave a series of interviews, her voice steady, her message clear. She talked about duty and sacrifice. She talked about identity and authenticity. She talked about the importance of judging people by their actions rather than their demographics. The reaction was explosive. Supporters praised her courage. Critics questioned her integrity. Politicians debated. Social media erupted. Death threats arrived. So did letters of gratitude from young people who said her story gave them hope. Through it all, Sarah remained focused on her mission. She moved to Virginia, took up her new position, and began the work of reshaping special operations training. She worked with SEAL teams who had once been her brothers, some of whom welcomed her back and others who wanted nothing to do with her. She faced hostility, skepticism, and outright hatred from some quarters, but she also found allies in unexpected places. Old teammates who reached out to say they had always known something was different, but they had cared about her skills and her character more than anything else. Senior officers who privately admitted they had struggled with similar issues or had family members who were transgender. Young service members who saw her as a role model and a reason to believe. They could be both authentic and excellent. 5 years later, Sarah stood on a stage at the Naval Academy, addressing a graduating class of future officers. Her hair was fully gray now. Her face showed the lines of a life fully lived. The trident pin gleamed on her uniform, officially restored after a review board determined that her service record was exemplary regardless of the circumstances. Some of you in this audience are hiding something, she told them. Maybe it's your identity. Maybe it's your struggles. Maybe it's your doubts about whether you really belong here. I want you to know that hiding takes strength, but living authentically takes courage. And courage is what we need in leaders. She paused, looking out over the sea of young faces. A sergeant once told me to die. He meant it as a threat, a way to diminish me, to put me in what he thought was my place. But I didn't die. I survived. And then I thrived. Not because I was special, but because I refused to let anyone else define my worth or my capabilities. You will face people who doubt you, who hate you, who want to see you fail. Some of that hatred will come from outside, but some of it will come from within your own ranks. It will hurt. It will make you question everything. But your job is not to make everyone comfortable. Your job is to serve with honor, to lead with integrity, and to be so undeniably excellent that eventually even your critics have to acknowledge your value. She smiled then, a genuine expression of hard-won peace. The sergeant who threatened me is no longer in the military. He was discharged for his pattern of misconduct. But I'm still here, and I'm still serving. That's not revenge. That's just a natural consequence of choosing courage over hatred. The auditorium erupted in applause. Sarah stood at attention, accepting their recognition, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about the boy she had been, the man she had pretended to be, and the woman she had finally become. She was thinking about all the people who had helped her along the way, and all the people she might help in the future. She was thinking that maybe, just maybe, those two words that were meant to destroy her had actually set her free. Die now. But she hadn't died. She had been reborn. And in that rebirth, she had found something more valuable than acceptance or recognition or even peace. She had found herself. And that was worth everything. That's the end of today's story. But I hope it stays with you for a while. If something in it spoke to you, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't yet, and share your thoughts. It's your comments that keep me inspired to make the next one.